What I'm about to tell you started at the ballroom doors and ended with a truth nobody in my family wanted spoken out loud. For years, I thought being the quiet daughter meant being loved differently. Looking back, I think it just made me easier to overlook, and I didn't understand that until my own wedding day. On my wedding day, my father walked my sister down the aisle instead of me, and for a second I honestly thought I was looking at the wrong ballroom. I am Olivia Hayes, a 27-year-old pediatric occupational therapist from Columbus, and I stood frozen beside the doors while my younger sister, Lily Hayes, smiled through tears in a champagne dress that looked far too close to white. My father, Ronald Hayes, had his arm linked through hers like it was her ceremony. "Dad," I whispered. He glanced at me and looked away. My mother, Denise Hayes, stepped beside me immediately. "Olivia, don't do this," she said softly. I stared at her. "Don't do what?" She squeezed my arm. "Your sister's had a difficult month. She needs this." I blinked. "Needs what?" "My father." Mom lowered her voice. "Sweetheart, not every moment has to belong to you." My hands went cold. 200 guests watched, and nobody moved. My fiancé, Ethan Parker, started toward me immediately. "Olivia, what the hell is happening?" he whispered. Before I could answer, Mom stepped between us with a smile that looked practiced. "Everybody relax," she said. "Lily's been through enough lately." My mother-in-law, Diane Parker, frowned. "Denise, this is Olivia's wedding." Mom laughed softly. "And she's mature enough to understand that families make adjustments." I stared at Dad. "You didn't even tell me," he rubbed his neck. "Honey, your sister's breakup has been hard. I asked. Lily looked embarrassed. "I told them not to make a big deal." Then she smiled weakly and added, "I just didn't want to feel alone today." Mom nodded proudly. "See, she's thinking of everybody." I couldn't breathe. Then from the third row, an older man in a charcoal suit stood up slowly. Mom saw him, and for the first time in my life, I watched the color leave her face. The older man in the charcoal suit didn't look angry. If anything, he looked nervous. He walked toward me slowly and stopped beside the aisle. "Miss Hayes?" he asked quietly. I nodded, too confused to speak. He cleared his throat. "I know this isn't my place, but no bride should stand alone." Then he offered me his arm. The room went silent. Ethan looked stunned. My closest friend, Rachel Moore, whispered, "Who is that?" I didn't know. But before I could answer, Mom took a step forward so quickly she nearly stumbled. "No," she said sharply. "Absolutely not." Everybody turned toward her. Dad frowned. "Denise," Mom forced a smile. "This man is mistaken." The stranger looked directly at her. 27 years, Denise, I'm not mistaken." My chest tightened. Dad's face changed. Lily blinked. "Mom, do you know him?" Mom swallowed hard. "No." The man looked at me sadly and whispered, "Your grandmother hoped you'd recognize my eyes." I wish I could tell you I understood what he meant, but I didn't. I just stood there staring at him while the room held its breath. Ethan squeezed my hand. "Olivia, do you know him?" I shook my head. "No." Mom stepped forward again. "Security, please." My mother-in-law, Diane Parker, stood up immediately. "Denise, sit down," she said coldly. Dad rubbed his forehead. "Sir, I think you've made a mistake." The man nodded slowly. "I prayed for 27 years that I had." Then he reached inside his jacket and pulled out an old photograph. My grandmother, Evelyn Bennett, smiled back from the picture. My hands started shaking. "Grandma," I whispered. He nodded. "She mailed me this 6 months ago before she passed." Mom looked like she couldn't breathe. "Evelyn promised me," she whispered. The man looked at her sadly. "No, Denise, she promised she'd finally expose your lie. She said she'd already failed once and she wasn't going to fail again." Mom closed her eyes, and suddenly I wasn't sure whose daughter I really was. Nobody sat down, nobody even reached for their champagne glasses. The older man looked at me and said quietly, "My name is Victor Bennett." My mother, Denise Hayes, closed her eyes. "Victor, not here." He laughed softly. "You decided where here was 27 years ago." Dad stepped forward. "Sir, enough." Victor looked at him sadly. "Denise stole 27 years from me and Ronald helped protect that lie." My chest tightened. "What?" Ethan whispered. Lily looked completely lost. "Mom," Victor pulled a small envelope from his pocket. "Your grandmother sent me photographs, school records, and hospital papers before she passed. She wanted me to know my daughter wasn't dead." The room fell silent. Mom started crying. "I was scared." Victor shook his head sadly. "You weren't just scared, Denise. You told me our daughter died and your father helped you disappear before I could ask questions. You erased me from her life." Then he turned toward me. "And I don't expect anything from you." My hands were shaking. "And if you've ever found out your life belonged to somebody else's choices, then you know why I couldn't walk away." I looked at Dad because I needed him to laugh and call the whole thing ridiculous. Instead, he sat down and covered his face. "Olivia, I'm sorry," he whispered. My legs almost gave out. "You knew?" I asked. He nodded without looking at me. "Denise told me after Lily was born. By then, I convinced myself protecting our family mattered more than reopening old wounds. Every year that passed made telling the truth harder." Mom burst into tears. "I was 22. I didn't know what I was doing." My mother-in-law, Diane Parker, stared at her in disbelief. 22 is old enough to know your daughter isn't dead when she's not. Lily grabbed Mom's hand. Mom, tell me this isn't true. Mom sobbed harder. I loved both of you. Victor looked heartbroken. Denise, loving someone and stealing them aren't the same thing. Ethan squeezed my hand. Olivia, we can stop all this, but strangely I shook my head. No, my voice cracked. I want the truth, all of it. Mom sat in her chair crying while 200 people pretended not to listen. My younger sister, Lily Hayes, looked completely lost. Mom, what does he mean? She asked. Mom wiped her eyes. I thought I was protecting everyone. Lily shook her head. Protecting who? Dad whispered. Lily, please. She looked at him. No, Dad, don't do that, not right now. Then she turned to me with tears in her eyes. Olivia, I swear I didn't know any of this. I nodded because I believed her. Victor reached into his jacket and handed me a bundle of faded envelopes. Your grandmother sent copies of these too, he said quietly. My hands trembled. Inside were letters he never mailed. One read, today would have been your 8th birthday. Another said, if you were 15, I hope you laugh like your mother. 27 years of love with nowhere to go. I looked at Mom. You let him grieve me, and she couldn't answer. She just cried harder. The silence finally broke when my mother-in-law, Diane Parker, stood up. This wedding isn't over, she said firmly. Mom looked up. Diane, please. Diane shook her head. No, I've listened to enough. Then she turned toward the guests. Ladies and gentlemen, we're taking a short break. Nobody argued. Ethan walked over to Victor and quietly asked, Sir, would you still like to walk her down the aisle? Victor froze. Only if she wants me to. My chest tightened. 27 years of birthdays, 27 years of letters nobody ever read, 27 years of an empty grave. I looked at him and whispered, would you? Tears filled his eyes immediately. I've wanted to since the day you were born. Behind me, Mom started crying again, but for the first time in my life, I didn't turn around. I simply took Victor's arm, and the room stood up. I don't remember hearing the music start. I only remember looking at Victor Bennett and realizing he was trying not to cry. You sure? He whispered. I smiled through tears. I'm sure. Ethan squeezed his shoulder. Then let's get married. My mother, Denise Hayes, stood up suddenly. Olivia, please. I stopped and looked at her. Not now, Mom. Dad lowered his head. Lily was crying beside him. I'm sorry, she whispered. I nodded. I know. Then Victor took a shaky breath and said, your grandmother used to send me school pictures. I talked to them every birthday. My chest tightened. Grandma knew, he smiled sadly. She said she'd already failed once and wouldn't fail again. When the doors opened, 200 people stood. Nobody looked at Mom. Nobody looked at Dad. They looked at us. And I finally walked down the aisle with the man who had spent 27 years believing he had missed this moment forever. 6 months later, life felt quieter. Victor still wore charcoal suits and still called me every Sunday just to ask if I'd eaten. Ethan joked that I'd inherited another stubborn parent. Lily and I met for coffee once a month. Some days she cried, some days I did. Dad sent letters I wasn't ready to answer. Mom wrote too, but forgiveness and trust aren't the same thing. And the thing is, peace arrived slowly. It looked like peppermint tea with Victor. It looked like old recipe cards from Grandma Evelyn. It looked like finally knowing where my eyes came from. I learned something simple. The truth may arrive late, but love doesn't expire while waiting. If this story stayed with you, I'd love for you to like this video, subscribe so you never miss one, and leave a comment telling me if you've ever felt invisible in your own story. I'd love to hear you. Funny thing is, on my wedding day, my father walked my sister down the aisle, but my dad still walked me down it.